Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. It's just gone 3 o'clock here in South African, Namibian time. So good to see everyone, to chat to you this afternoon. Hello. If you're just joining us, how's it? If you're watching this on a pre-recorded or a post-recorded or whatever you're going to call it, so good to see you all. Thank you so much for coming through and watching and being a part of this session. We are on day 11 of our Healthy Mind 14-day challenge. And if you were with us or you've watched yesterday, we went to Vegas. So if you haven't watched it yet, then please go, because you want to go to Vegas, right? But it's not the Vegas that me and you know. It's a different Vegas. It's a Vegas that helps us sort of deal with our stresses, okay? And how do we do that? Pretty simply, it's the vagus nerve. It's a nerve in our body that connects almost everything to everything. It's the nerve where most of the body speaks to the mind or the brain, and the brain speaks to most of the body. And it's this fantastic little tool we can use when we are extremely stressed, when we are going through exceptionally stressful situations, to help us to dampen the harmful effects of lots of adrenaline and lots of cortisol. And that adrenaline and that cortisol, that's the body's reaction to external circumstances or when we need to fight or when we need to flight. And chronic sort of exposure to this adrenaline and this cortisol, so by chronic we mean lots of it, lots of the time, this causes major problems, right? And so a way that we can begin to reverse that is by going to Vegas. So go and watch yesterday. For those of you that did watch yesterday, I hope that you maybe tried one or two of them. Maybe you went to a yoga class. Maybe you went for a massage this morning. Maybe you went for a swim. Maybe you did the face in the water technique. That's my favorite. I promise you, it's so much fun. You should try it. You might be thinking, what are you talking about, Grant? Go and watch it. Okay, we went to Vegas yesterday. Now, you would have noticed over the last while, we've been speaking about a healthy mind, but there has been a lot of talk of this science about what happens when we are in particular situations that are causing us so much distress, that are causing us the stress, and what's going on in here and how we can try to reverse that. So we've been speaking about oxytocin, and we've been speaking about dopamine, and we've been speaking about serotonin, and we've been speaking about the vagus nerve, for example. You know, we have been doing a lot of this biology almost. But today we're going to change scope slightly. We're going to begin to work on the sociological effects of these things, the sociological causes for a lot of our unhappiness, a lot of our distress, a lot of our mild depressions and anxieties. And we're going to look at beginning to try somehow to reverse those. Then tomorrow, we are really going to work on self-care and how you can genuinely look after yourself. Then on Thursday, I'm going to give you another tool called sympathetic joy. And then on Friday, we're going to wrap it all up together. Okay, so now that we know that, let's give it a go and let's start together. And I think today, you know, what is it? A lovely Tuesday afternoon here. I think we need to go to the beach. What do you say? Yeah, I think we need to go to the beach. So let's imagine all together that we are stepping out onto a beautiful beach. And as you step out into this beautiful beach, I want you to feel the sand in your feet, in your toes, creeping up into your toes. You know that lovely feeling of the sand in your toes. And I want you to look towards the actual water itself. I want you to imagine wading slowly into the water as you walk your feet slide down into the sand, and the cold water comes up back a little bit quickly, and then you move forward again into this cold water for a moment. And I want you to stand there and imagine that the waves crash, and you begin to sink lower and lower as you do down into this. And as we do this, I want you to take a deep sea breeze breath in. Deep exhale out. Just feel yourself being totally grounded on this beach as you take this salty, slightly fishy smell of the ocean in. And slowly exhale. So friends, the reason why we start a session like this is, one, to help calm the vagus nerve. If there's any overactive adrenaline, if there's any cortisol pumping through the body, we take these deep breaths so we begin to reset. Secondly, we ground ourselves into the ground so that we can feel we are here. And thirdly, we just take a moment from our hectic day just to be together. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to take us to the beach is that I want to start by telling you a little story about this guy. So this guy is a gold saddle goatfish. He's a peculiar looking little fish, and you find him in Hawaii. I'm sure you find him in other places, but my story takes place in Hawaii. And so divers used to go down and they used to look at this little cute gold saddled goatfish. And at one time, divers started coming up from their dives and started saying to the dive masters and the sea biologists, started saying, there is this big fish that we can't identify. It's the color of this guy, maybe a little bit darker, but it's big. It's a big fish, and it's shaped very similarly to this goatfish. So it's quite elongated, but it's a very big fish. And the scientists said, well, we've never heard of this species before. This is incredible. So they don on their gear and they dive down into the Hawaiian reefs to go and look for this big fish, this big golden fish that kind of looked like a goatfish, but was really big. And this little gold saddled goatfish is about this big, right? So this is crazy. This is this big fish. They dive down and they go and look for it. And as they swim, they see it. And so they begin to approach it. They want to go and they want to see, they want to take photos of it. And as they get there, they realize something. They realize that this is not one big fish, but lots of little goatfish that are coming together to form what looks like a bigger fish. Now, what's interesting about this is experts have never seen this kind of behavior from this particular fish. However, what they do know currently is that in the seas in Hawaii, and specifically on these reefs, they've had this massive influx of the apex predators, the sharks. And the sharks are coming into these waters because of overfishing in other waters. And this is the first time that this little goatfish has to encounter this many apex predators. So what do we think happened? Well, maybe the goatfish got all together and they had a little conference. And they decided that the best way to protect themselves is to join each other's little tribe. And genuinely, that's what they're doing, right? Because what they began to observe is that when the apex predator swam towards the big fish, they would look at it and they would simply move on to another fish. They don't attack the little goatfish. They attack them when they're little, but they don't attack them when they're one big fish, because they're one big fish and, you know, that's difficult to attack. This is really, really incredible, because the goatfish understood that the only way they're going to survive this onslaught of lots of new predators is to stick together, to come together, to make one big fish. This is clever, right? I want you to remember this story for a moment, because we're going to come back to this. And specifically on day number one, we spoke about this feeling a lot of us are experiencing, this level of anxiety, this level of depression that continuously rises, this level of unhappiness. Now, today we're going to speak specifically from one of my favorite books on the topic. It's by a guy called Johann Hari, and it's called Lost Connections, Why You're Depressed and How to Find Hope. He's written some really incredible works, and he's a researcher. And so he's done a lot of research on this topic, specifically around this idea of connecting. And he says, when he starts this, he speaks about how dire the situation is from a mental wellness perspective all over the world. He says, you know, if you test the waters in Western countries where they have facilities to test the waters, you find huge amounts of antidepressants in our water. And that doesn't come from anything but us using the antidepressants. You know, they say 1 in 3 people in France over the age of 12 are using antidepressants. That number goes up in other countries in Europe. We're talking about massive amounts of people turning to their last hope, a little bottle of pills to feel a little bit better, to help them feel a little bit better. Johann speaks about what he calls the continuum of mental health. And it's a really interesting concept. And I'm not saying he's 100% correct, but it's interesting, right? He says that although depression, anxiety, and unhappiness are not the same thing, he says they seem to be on a continuum. He says unhappiness over here because the same causes of unhappiness is leading us to a space of depression, a space of anxiety. He speaks about one particular thing that he believes in his research and the metadata of hundreds of studies of one particular thing that is causing us great unhappiness, that is causing us great levels of depression and anxiety in so many of us every single day. He speaks of three main causes: biological causes and psychological causes. Some of what we've been speaking of over the last 14 days. So when he says biological causes, he's mainly speaking about the role of genes and what's going on in the physical brain. So we have a lack of a particular something, not necessarily caused by an external circumstance, or it could be caused by an external circumstance, but there are biological causes. Now, what you will find in the world of psychology is a lot of the time there are schools of psychologists that like to just speak about it being biological. It's just biological. And he says, you make a grand mistake when you do that. You make a grand mistake. So other psychologists will add a different layer, and we'll call it the psychological causes. And I don't think that's uncommon either, right? So it's the biological causes as well as the psychological causes. And what do we mean by psychological causes? We mean traumas. Childhood traumas, adulthood traumas that are causing us unhappiness, that are causing us levels of depression and levels of anxiety. And I think we can all accept that that is a real and definite thing happening to all of us, right? But then he says we mustn't discount what he calls the social causes, or not what he calls, what science is now calling the social causes. And when you do the meta-analyses and all of these hundreds of studies that you can collate, you begin to see something really interesting. You begin to see that it seems that the social causes trigger off those other two causes, the biological causes and the psychological causes. So what do we mean by this? Pretty simply. In other words, if someone has had severe childhood trauma, but has very strong structures in their lives, meaningful structures, connections in their lives. We're speaking about meaningful work. We're speaking about strong connections with other human beings, a close-knit, strong tribe of people. We're speaking about meaningful values. We're speaking about a sense of respect for ourselves and that others give us. We're speaking about a deep and meaningful connection with nature and a hopefulness, that's better, a hopefulness and a sense of a secure future. He says if all of those things come together, that individual that has experienced childhood trauma might not be as susceptible to slipping into depression and anxiety from someone who comes from very similar childhood trauma, but is disconnected from meaningful work, other people, meaningful values, respect the natural world, and hope and a sense of future. So what he's saying to us in these meta-analyses of all of these research papers that he's looked through and research that he's done himself is that unhappiness and some of our mental unhealthy patterns are showing up and are because of these disconnections. Now, before we imagine this for a moment, I want us to imagine again, let's have some fun. Let's go back to the savannah. Remember on day one, we went to the savannah. What savannah you speak of? We went to the savannah of where we used to live a long, long time ago. Saber-toothed tiger comes in here. I've got these two strong cousins. I'm pretty fit. Okay, I'm not, but you know what I mean. I'm pretty fit. I reckon I could run away. And as a tribe, I think we could somewhat protect ourselves from a saber-toothed tiger. So the strength of our existence came in the numbers, right? The strength was in the numbers. Our ability to defend ourselves, our ability to stay alive was directly connected to those members of our tribe. Because without them, we were in trouble. Because I want you to imagine that if you go on a walk with the tribe one day through the grasslands, and all of a sudden you turn around because you were busy on your iPhone 11,500 years ago, and you were busy and you look up and your family's gone, and you hear a saber-toothed tiger. What happens? Saber-toothed tiger comes up to you, looks at the scrawny little body and says, lunch is officially served. The chances that I was going to survive on my own, zero, literally zero. The chances that I'm going to survive in my tribe, much better. And so we, as humans, our very survival is connection to the group, Our ability to stay with the group, to be connected with the group, and to use the group to be able to protect us. So what begins to happen? Again, I'm walking on the savannah, playing with my iPhone from 11,500 years ago, and I realize that the tribe is gone. And what happens? Fight or flight comes in immediately. And what does that do? It sends a signal to the body. And what else happens? Anxiety begins to happen. Why? Because I'm about to get eaten. And so I start getting anxious about this disconnect. I start getting anxious about the fact that I'm not connected to my tribe. And then what happens? Depression kicks in. I get depressed about the fact that I'm on my own and I'm going to get eaten. And this is the body's natural way of saying, Grant, go back to the tribe. Go back to the tribe. I am unhappy alone. I'm unhappy standing without my tribe. I am technically depressed about being on my own. I am lonely and anxious about being on my own. Why? Because if not, I'm going to get eaten. I'm going to get eaten. So isn't this incredible? If you go and you think about that for a moment, you can begin to see how we are wired to be connected to each other. We are wired to be connected to our little tribes. But what have me and you gone and done? What have we gone and done? Well, researcher, Professor, I think his name is Professor P. Putnam, he says virtually all forms of family and connectedness and coming together have become less common over the last quarter of the 20th century. And I quote, he says, we do things together less than any humans who have come before us. Long before the economic crash of 2008, and he was obviously speaking in 2008, he says there was a social crash in which we find ourselves alone and lonely more than any other time in our human history. Friends, we barely know our neighbors. We've stopped going to churches and other social spaces. In Europe, they now have less church-based communities and other communities of interest than ever before. This speaks to communities across the world. We are indoors most of the day. Our children play TV games and have forgotten what the lawn feels like, right? We have created horrible working conditions for millions and billions of people across the planet. We've lost respect for each other. Our values are meaningless and materialistic. And all of this has meant that we have lost hope and a sense of future. And the research tells us if we want to be happier, we have to learn to reconnect ourselves with meaningful work, reconnect ourselves with other people purposefully and meaningfully, reconnect ourselves with meaningful values, with respect towards other people and thus them giving respect to you, to meaningfully connect with our natural world and to connect with hope and a sense of future. So let's look at some of the other research that speaks about how this disconnection is a real issue for us. So not only biologically are we programmed to want to get back to the tribe, right? Take a listen to this. According to a neuroscientist, John Cacioppo, I like that name, John Cacioppo, he says that he did some research, and really interesting research. What he would do is he would study the cortisol levels, the stress levels of people, and he found a piece of research. What they did was when someone came into the emergency room in the States, and they did this in a few cities where they had quite a large sort of group of people that they were testing. But what they would do is if you came into the ER having been physically attacked, so either been hit or stabbed or something that's physically happened to you, they would measure your cortisol levels. So they're trying to see what stress is like for someone that was physically attacked. And then they would compare it to other stress levels of other people who, for example, were in car accidents and what happens to the cortisol there, and some really interesting research, right? But there is a body of evidence around if you've been punched and you go to the ER, where your cortisol levels sitting. And as you know, we've spoken about this, that those cortisol levels peak at about 15 to 20 minutes, and then they can carry on for a few hours, right? So once you've been in the attack, still gone to the ER, we still have evidence of this cortisol. So they would measure the cortisol and they have this body of evidence. And so this John guy, what he asked people to do is you can measure cortisol in your spit. So what he would do is he'd have little vials of people to carry around with him. And then he said, the moment you feel disconnected from the world, spit in here for me. And then write down your level of disconnection between 1 and 10. So I'm feeling totally disconnected. People are not listening to me. No one sees me. I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling super connected. It's a 1. But I'm not super connected because I'm feeling slightly disconnected, but not much. So it's a small little disconnection, right? So a 1 being a small little disconnection and a 10 being a major disconnection. And then what he did is he took those results and he compared them to those people that were in the ER after they had a physical attack. And you know what's so particularly interesting is that people who rate a 6 and above, so when they're feeling disconnection from a 6 and above, their cortisol levels are almost exactly the same from someone that has been punched in the face. Think about that for a moment. Are we saying that disconnection has the same stresses on our body as being punched in the face? We are. We are. This disconnection with people in the world around us is literally, it's like hitting ourselves in the face. Then there's some more research by someone called Sheldon Cohen. Sheldon Cohen says that people who are disconnected and lonely are 3 times more likely to catch a cold than people who are less connected with people. So it weakens our immune system. And we all know, living in the times that we do, how important our immune system is, right? It weakens our immune system to be disconnected from the world around us. Again, John, he does some work on this, and he was saying, some more work on this, sorry, and he was saying that disconnection with people and the world around them has the same effect on your health as being obese. And we know obesity is considered one of the biggest health crises of the developed world. And then there's a beautiful study, the Harvard 82-year study on longevity. They've literally been doing the study for 82 years, and it keeps on going, and they keep on inputting in the data, and they keep on providing the world with the results. And you know what's interesting is you begin to see over these 83, now almost 84 years, that those people with the strongest interpersonal relationships live longer. Live longer. So what we're speaking about today is pretty much scientifically proven to make us less depressed, less anxious, and it's going to improve our immune system, and it's going to make us live longer, friends. It's going to make us live longer. There's beautiful studies of groups of people in Israel, the Haredic community, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. But this community, they have generally a lifestyle of what me and you would consider, or what research would consider, slightly unhealthy. They eat lots of oily things and lots of baked goods, and they don't really run or exercise much, but they live for a very, very long time. And when researchers go into this, they begin to see how this connection and this community, the sense of community that these small-knit Jewish communities have in Israel, very strong sense of community. They eat together every night. They share with each other. They are connected to their tribes, and they live longer. They are healthier than us. They are, or speak for myself, Grant, they are happier when they measure their happiness. They have less cases of depression. They have less cases of anxiety. Now, take the religious aspect out of this for a moment. What we're speaking about is the sense of community. That's what we're speaking about. We're speaking about being connected with the world around us and how vitally important this is for our mental health. You know, I want to tell you a quick story of when I think it was probably about probably about 10 years ago. I was in the Hong Kong airport, and I was sitting next to a big guy, this big strong guy, and he had his headphones on, and I sat down next to him, and I was drinking whatever I was drinking. And now I have this really strange, peculiar band that I love. They're from the UK. They don't exist anymore, and they're called Nizlopi, right? Strange band, but I love them. And I loved the 3 albums that they brought out. But anyway, why this is important for the story is because when I was sitting down next to this guy with his headphones on, I kind of thought to myself, I can hear Nizlopi. I'm sure I can hear Nizlopi. Now, nowhere in my life would I have ever have thought that I would hear Nizlopi in a Hong Kong airport, right? Because why? Because no one knows who this band is. And so I kept on looking around to try to see where the sound was coming from. And I kind of figured that it was coming from this dude. It's coming from his headphones. And I thought to myself, like, should I connect with a stranger? Should I say to him, oh my gosh, I also love this? And then I would hear the next track, and I'd hear the next track, and I'd hear that he's only listening to Nizlopi, right? I mean, what are the chances? And so I sort of sat there for 30 minutes going, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? And eventually I plucked up the courage, and I sort of waved, and he was a big guy, so I was scared, you know, and he took his headphones off. He was like, yeah. He didn't say, yeah, that's very South African. He said, yes, how can I help you? And I said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but tell me, are you listening to Nizlopi? And he said, oh my gosh, do you know who Nzlopi is? And I said, yes, I do. And we literally spent the next 45 minutes until I had to get onto the plane speaking about our favorite band and speaking about how we are so upset that they're not together anymore and how we'll never get to see them. And we formed this incredible sense of connection. And friends, when I tell you the story, I've never heard from this guy again. We've never spoken again, but that moment brings me so much joy. Because there we were connecting with a tribe, with a person that had the same interests that I had, and we connected human to human in the most beautiful way. In the most beautiful way. And I don't know what's happening in the brain with chemicals and all of this lovely things, but I can tell you unequivocally that moment brings me joy when I remember it. It was such a warm, beautiful moment because it was a moment of connection. Think about some of your favorite memories and know that they would have been connected to the people around you, your family, your friends. They're there with you. They're experiencing it with you. Some of our happiest moments are drawn from the tribe. And so today we're going to leave day 11 with understanding that this disconnection from our world around us is making us sick. It's causing us major unhappiness, forms of depression and anxiety. And it's time to start connecting again. It's time to take the brave step to tap the shoulder of a stranger and to connect with them, to look into their eyes and to share a moment with them. Unlike you and me have been doing for years and years. We've been locking ourselves in our houses, because there's been a pandemic, but even before that, we've been doing it more than any other humans have done it any time before us. And now we want to know why we're so unhappy and so depressed and so anxious. And maybe one of the ways in which we can begin to get a little bit happier is starting that connection again. And so I'm going to ask you to try as hard as you can to begin to practice and find meaningful ways to connect with other humans, with people around us, to make an effort to connect with people daily, to phone your mother, to phone your grandmother, to connect on Zoom if you can't see them, and to go and see them again, to go and spend time on the weekends, not on the couch, but with other people, to connect with them, to go and have adventures with them, to go and drink coffee with them, to go and sit on the beach with them, but to reconnect with the people around us. And why? We'll become happier, we'll be less depressed, and we will be less anxious. This is what the research shows us. And now we have an opportunity to practice that. I'm always reminded as we draw to a close this afternoon of the fact that one of the beautiful things about well-being and self-care is that we get the opportunity to play around with it, right? We get the opportunity to see if yesterday putting our face in a bowl of water actually works. We get the opportunity to see if connections really work. But I reckon, and I don't know much in life, but I reckon simply by knowing that some of my greatest experiences have come from that deep, meaningful, shared experience with others. And so I'm imploring you to try this one. Maybe it's not the yoga or the practice we spoke about yesterday or the swimming that gets you excited, but I think this one might, and I hope it does. So go and reconnect. Go and reconnect with the world around you, with people around you, and take a moment to look into their eyes and find those lost connections again. Because I guarantee you that with them comes levels of happiness, comes decreased levels of depression and levels of anxiety. Fantastic. Thank you for connecting with me today. Tomorrow, I'm excited. We've got a guest coming on. She's our resident psychologist at Mindful Revolution, and she's going to teach us to take care of ourselves. So I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to introducing you to the wonderful Ashley. So until then, look after yourself, connect, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye, everyone.